All right, so now we're putting tariffs on 8 European countries like France, a lot of our allies. Trump has said on True Social, because of course, that this is a very dangerous situation for the safety, security, and survival of the planet. It's not tenable. This is emergency-ish language, which is going to come back. This is all about Greenland. Of course, they're outraged. Now European Union folks are having emergency meetings. Some of their politicians are saying they should boycott the 2026 World Cup in the United States. So I got into this. It's actually very interesting because clearly Article 1 of the Constitution says that Congress has broad authority to collect taxes for federal debts, common defense, and the general welfare, basically all the money stuff. And furthermore, there's a specific clause that says that they have the power to regulate commerce with foreign nations. All of this, of course, is by design because the founding fathers did not like the idea of kings who could arbitrarily put in taxes. And you have a lot of writers, like this person who wrote in April of last year that Congress should just take back control over tariffs. And I've been wondering about this myself. And as I mentioned, the history here, pretty interesting. So Congress, of course, did have the full power to tariff, and they used it to pass the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act in 1930. So basically, these are a bunch of specific tariffs on 20,000 imported goods. This happened at the beginning of the Great Depression. My research about this act was that you literally had senators saying, like, you want to tax blueberries because your voters make blueberries, and you want to tax Italian leather shoes because you've got a bunch of shoemakers in your district. And they would just be like, cool, let's just tax both of them. So while specific industries got little boosts, overall trade decreased by 66%, and the Smoot-Hawley tariffs worsened the Great Depression. So then just 4 years later, Congress passes this Reciprocal Tariff Act, which specifically authorizes the president to negotiate with foreign nations to reduce tariffs. So here you see FDR signing the Reciprocal Trade Agreements Act. Basically, this is the beginning, as you're going to see, of a long chain of Congress giving the power to manage tariffs to the president. Because then in 1962, you have this Trade Expansion Act, covers international trade agreements and how you work with domestic industries. It grants the President of the United States unprecedented authority to negotiate tariff reductions and also to impose tariffs based on a recommendation of the U.S. Secretary of Commerce. So now the President and his associates can basically determine whether or not a tariff needs to happen and then do it. Then you have the Trade Act of 1974, passed to give President more power in the matters of trade agreements and tariffs. Then in 1977, the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, which grants the president authority to regulate international commerce after declaring a national emergency. And I told you this was going to come back. This is very emergency-ish language. And Congress really tried to even get into what an emergency was. They had this thing called the National Emergencies Act, which specifically was there to provide for an orderly implementation and termination of national emergencies, because basically they were like, okay, we need to make sure that when the president declares an emergency, we can know what that is and how to handle that. But the Supreme Court got involved, and in this case, INS versus Chadha in 1983, they basically said, listen, if you are going to end a presidential declared national emergency, you're going to need a joint resolution, meaning both the Senate and the House will have to pass this resolution. In the case of Trump, this will almost certainly be vetoed. So that means to even end the emergency, you're going to need a supermajority, 2/3 in both chambers, the House and the Senate, to end this emergency. And you can apply the same logic to Congress changing tariff laws. You would basically have to have a supermajority in both the House and the Senate to approve changes to all this tariff stuff that I've just shown you. And currently, Jason Smith is the head of the Ways and Means Committee, basically the money committee in the House of Representatives. Here is Jason Smith's op-ed in the Washington Examiner saying specifically that Trump's trade agenda will fuel an economic boom. Pretty sure Mr. Smith is not going to be a party to taking Trump's tariff powers away. Here is Senator Mike Crapo, that is how you say that, from Idaho. He is the chair of the Senate Finance Committee, who has specifically blocked tariff-related bills already. So basically, Congress had the power to tariff. They passed law, giving it to the president. And actually, my takeaway here is that this might be by design. It seems like there's lots of instances of Congress basically giving their constitutional responsibilities to the president. And I think this is so that they can not take the heat for a lot of decisions and stay in office. Because, for example, you see here that when it's unpopular, then the Republicans will just say, hey, listen, this is Trump stuff. So rather than Congress getting involved, they'll just give the power to the president and say, wasn't my fault. And it's important to remember that in the DNA of the tariff conversation is the disaster of Congress having the tariffs and then passing the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act. So the final chapter to this story is probably going to be the Supreme Court. What do you hope they do?